The segment began smoothly enough, with Kimmel lobbing softballs about Lawrence's recent indie drama, a gritty character study that had earned her buzz but no Oscar nod. The audience laughed at her self-deprecating tale of spilling coffee on set, a classic J-Law anecdote that endeared her to fans who saw their own clumsiness in her charm. But as the laughter subsided, Kimmel's demeanor shifted. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, his voice dropping into a faux curious tone that set the crowd on edge. "So, Jennifer," he said, his smirk curling like a blade, "did the Academy skip your invite this year because your name's not lighting up marquees like it used to?" The question, rooted in real whispers about her quieter career after Joy and Passengers flopped, landed like a thunderclap. The audience gasped, their murmurs tinged with indignation. For many, the jab echoed their own struggles with being dismissed in their later years, whether at work or in social circles. Lawrence's smile froze, her fingers tightening around the armrest of her chair, the leather creaking faintly under her grip. "Wow, Jimmy, you're not pulling punches tonight," she said, her Kentucky drawl steady but laced with a spark of defiance. Her eyes locked onto his, unyielding. "I didn't know the Oscars were a popularity contest now. Maybe they missed my RSVP while I was out, building a foundation and making films I actually care about." The audience rallied, their applause swelling with the fervor of those who'd fought to prove their worth past society's expiration date. A few older women in the front row nodded fiercely, their hands clapping with deliberate force. But Kimmel's grin didn't waver. If anything, it sharpened, as if he'd anticipated her parry and relished the chance to escalate. The cameras swiveled, catching the flicker of tension in his jaw, the steely resolve in her gaze. Backstage, the control room descended into barely contained chaos. "What the hell is he doing?" a producer snapped, her voice crackling through the headset. "We agreed, no career jabs." The director, eyes glued to the monitors, muttered, "Let it play, ratings are spiking." On stage, Kimmel pressed forward, undeterred, his voice now dripping with mock nostalgia. "You've always been America's sweetheart, Jen. Tripping up the Oscar steps, spilling pizza at after-parties," he said, referencing her infamous falls at the 2013 and 2014 Academy Awards, moments that had cemented her relatable image, but also fueled tabloid mockery. "Was that all just a klutzy, lovable act to win us over? Or were you really just that girl we all felt sorry for?" The question was a dagger, slicing into her authenticity and evoking the sexist tropes that had plagued women of the audience's generation, reduced to ditzy or helpless to be palatable. The crowd's laughter was hesitant, fractured. Some booed softly, their discomfort palpable. For the older viewers, it stirred memories of being underestimated, of having their competence questioned because of gender or age. Jennifer's jaw clenched, her smile now a thin taut line. She leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees, closing the distance between her and Kimmel as if daring him to push further. "Jimmy, I've never had to act real. It's who I am," she said, her voice low and deliberate, each word a quiet rebuke. "Tripping's human. Spilling pizza's human. Maybe you should try being human sometime instead of hiding behind cheap shots." The audience erupted, their cheers thundering through the studio, a wave of solidarity from those who'd learned resilience through decades of slights. Several older men in the crowd pumped their fists, while a woman in her 70s stood, clapping fiercely, her eyes gleaming with pride. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the standoff. Lawrence's unyielding stare, her chin tilted defiantly, Kimmel's fingers tightening on his note cards, his grin faltering for a split second before he recovered with a forced chuckle. The studio teetered on a razor's edge, the tension suffocating. The band shifted uneasily in their corner, their instruments silent. In the control room, a producer shouted, "Get ready for commercial!" But the director waved her off, sensing the moment was too raw to cut away. Lawrence's eyes never left Kimmel's, her posture radiating a quiet fury that promised more to come. Kimmel, sensing the crowd's shift, leaned back, his smirk now a mask, but his knuckles whitened around his cards. The crew held their breath, the spotlights casting long shadows across the stage. Whatever came next, the night was poised to ignite, and the fallout would be unforgettable. A producer's voice crackled through headsets. "He's going off the rails!" But the director, eyes glued to the monitors, hissed, "Keep rolling, this is gold." Kimmel, sensing the crowd's unease but doubling down, leaned forward, his voice dripping with a faux casual tone that barely concealed its venom. "Come on, Jen," he said, his smirk sharpening. "You've had America eating out of your hand for years, tripping, joking, being the queen of memes. But let's be real. Who's laughing at you now?" The question was a gut punch, laced with implications of fading relevance, aging out of Hollywood's spotlight, and the cruel scrutiny women face as they pass 30. It echoed real tabloid narratives that had dogged Lawrence since her post-Hunger Games career slowed, with headlines questioning if her moment had passed. The audience gasped, a collective intake of breath that rippled through the studio. For the older viewers, many in their 60s and beyond, it struck a raw nerve. Memories of being sidelined at work, dismissed by younger colleagues, or judged for their age in a youth-obsessed culture. A few boos erupted, tentative at first, then louder, as a woman in her late 60s near the front row shook her head, her lips pursed in disgust. Lawrence's face hardened, her jaw tightening as the weight of Kimmel's words settled. The studio lights seemed to brighten, pinning her in their glare, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she set her water glass down with a deliberate clink, the sound cutting through the murmurs like a gavel. Slowly, she stood, her 5 feet 9 inches frame commanding the stage, her emerald blazer catching the light as she moved. The audience stilled, sensing a shift, their eyes locked on her. Kimmel's grin faltered, his posture stiffening as he realized he'd crossed a line he couldn't easily retreat from. In the control room, a producer shouted, "Cut to commercial now!" But the director waved her off, muttering, "No way, this is history." "Jimmy," Lawrence began, her Kentucky drawl low and resonant, each word measured but searing with conviction. "I came here tonight to talk about something bigger than myself. Mental health, young people, giving kids a chance to feel seen and supported. Something I've poured my heart into because I know what it's like to struggle." Her voice cracked slightly, a raw edge that humanized her, resonating with the audience's own battles. "But instead, you've turned this into a game of cheap shots, digging at my career, my authenticity, my age, my worth as a woman, and I'm done playing." The crowd murmured, a swell of support building. Lawrence took a step forward, her gaze sweeping the audience, connecting with the older faces who nodded in silent solidarity. "You ask who's laughing at me now?" she continued, her voice rising, steady but fierce. "Let me tell you who's not laughing. Every woman who's ever been called past her prime because she dares to keep showing up. Every person who's been reduced to a stereotype, klutzy, quirky, forgettable, because it's easier to mock them than to respect them. Every one of us who's fought to be taken seriously in a world that loves to tear us down." Her words landed like thunder, each sentence a rebuke not just of Kimmel, but of a culture that had long dismissed women like her, and the audience who'd lived it. A man in his 70s, his face weathered but eyes bright, clapped slowly, the sound spreading as others joined. She turned back to Kimmel, her eyes blazing. "I've spent 15 years building a career I'm proud of, not because I'm chasing memes or headlines, but because I believe in stories that matter. I've fallen on red carpets, sure, but I've gotten back up every time. I've faced anxiety, scrutiny, and every tabloid lie you can imagine, and I'm still here. And you?" Her voice sharpened, cutting through his defenses. "You're sitting there, throwing jabs to goose your ratings, thinking it makes you clever. It doesn't. It makes you a bully." The word hung in the air, heavy and final. The audience erupted, their applause a deafening wave. Several women stood, their hands raised in defiance, while a group of retirees in the back chanted, "Jen! Jen!" The cameras swiveled frantically, capturing the chaos. Lawrence's unyielding stance, Kimmel's face drained of color, his smirk replaced by a tight-lipped grimace. Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, his hand raised as if to deflect, but Lawrence cut him off with a raised palm. "I'm not done," she said, her voice a quiet command that silenced the room. "This isn't just about me. It's about every woman in this audience, every person watching at home who's been told they're too much or not enough. It's about my mom, who worked her whole life and still had to prove herself. It's about the girls who write to my foundation, scared they'll never be enough. You don't get to reduce us to punchlines. Her words, raw and universal, struck a chord with the older viewers, many of whom had faced similar battles in their careers and lives. A woman in her late 60s, her silver hair catching the light, wiped a tear from her cheek, nodding fiercely. Lawrence paused, her chest rising as she drew a steadying breath. She turned to the audience, her expression softening but resolute. "I'm here for something bigger than this circus," she said, gesturing at the set. "If you care about mental health, about lifting each other up, join me, because I'm not stopping, no matter how many cheap shots come my way." The crowd roared, their applause shaking the studio, a cathartic release of decades' worth of frustration. The band, caught off guard, struck a triumphant chord, amplifying the moment. She glanced at Kimmel one last time, her eyes carrying a mix of pity and resolve. "I'm done here," she said simply, her voice final. With that, she turned and walked off the stage, her head high, her steps measured but purposeful. The audience leapt to their feet, their ovation thunderous, a wave of admiration for a woman who'd turned a trap into a triumph. The cameras followed her exit, capturing the sway of her blazer, the defiant tilt of her chin, until she vanished into the wings. The studio descended into pandemonium. Kimmel sat frozen, his hands flat on the desk, his face a mask of shock. The control room exploded with shouts. "Go to commercial!" "Now!" The director, shaking his head in disbelief, signaled the cut, and the show lurched into an awkward ad break, the screen fading to a car commercial as the audience's cheers lingered. Backstage, Lawrence's team swarmed her, their faces a mix of awe and relief. "You were incredible," her publicist whispered, but Lawrence just nodded, her eyes distant, already thinking of the bigger fight ahead. The fallout was immediate and seismic. Social media ignited, with #sign Team Jennifer and #sign Kimmel exposed, trending worldwide within minutes. Clips of Lawrence's speech went viral, shared by celebrities like Meryl Streep, who tweeted, "Jennifer Lawrence just spoke truth to power. Proud." Fans flooded X with memes of Lawrence's exit, captioned with phrases like "Queen J-Law" and "Kimmel's done." The older demographic, especially women over 60, rallied behind her, flooding online forums with stories of their own battles against ageism and sexism. One viral post read, "I'm 68, and Jen just said what I've felt my whole life. She's our voice." Lawrence's mental health foundation saw an unprecedented surge in support. Donations poured in, with a spike from donors over 60, many citing her speech as their inspiration. Her website crashed from traffic, and her team scrambled to field interview requests from 60 Minutes, The View, and Oprah Daily. Her career, far from forgotten, was reinvigorated, with producers now clamoring to attach her to prestige projects, sensing her renewed cultural clout. Kimmel's empire, meanwhile, began to crack. Viewers, particularly his older audience, skewered him online, calling his questions cruel and out of touch. A petition demanding an apology gained 100,000 signatures overnight. Sponsors like AARP, sensitive to their demographics' outrage, issued statements distancing themselves, while rumors swirled of network executives holding emergency meetings. Kimmel's next episode opened with a stilted apology. "I got carried away, didn't mean to upset anyone." But it fell flat, mocked as too little, too late. Ratings for Jimmy Kimmel. Liv dipped sharply, with analysts noting a drop in viewership among women over 50, a key demographic. X posts speculated about his future, with one trending tweet reading, "Kimmel thought he'd roast J-Law. Instead, he roasted his career." In the weeks that followed, Lawrence emerged as a cultural touchstone, her speech dissected in think pieces about Hollywood's treatment of women and the pervasive sting of ageism. She gave a single interview to Vanity Fair where she said, "I didn't plan to walk off, but I couldn't sit there and let that moment define me. I had to define it." Her foundation's gala, held a month later, drew A-listers and raised millions, with Lawrence delivering a keynote that echoed her Kimmel speech. "We're not here to be laughed at. We're here to change the world." Kimmel, meanwhile, faced a long road to redemption. His show limped on, but the incident became a permanent stain, referenced in late-night monologues and comedy specials. For Lawrence, The night was a turning point, a moment where she reclaimed her narrative, not just for herself, but for every woman who'd ever been underestimated. As one 72-year-old fan tweeted, Jennifer didn't just win that night, she won for all of us.